In a world that constantly demands answers, performance, and certainty, I've found myself returning, again and again, to something quiet, simple, and deeply human. Prayer. Not the kind wrapped in ritual or religion, but the kind that begins in silence, shaped only by the weight in your chest and the longing for clarity. Prayer to me feels like a friend I didn't know I needed, especially now, in a time when society often rewards noise over stillness and action over reflection. There are moments when I feel overwhelmed by things beyond my control, responsibilities, decisions, expectations, and in those moments I don't need more information, I need connection. That's why I pray. Not to escape reality, but to meet it with strength. Not to control outcomes, but to calm my inner storms. In this video, I want to walk with you through the Stoic lens of prayer, not as a superstition, but as a daily practice of grounding, gratitude, resilience, and trust. You'll discover 7 timeless truths. How prayer rewires your thoughts, rebuilds your peace, and helps you hear your own soul more clearly. Whether you believe in a higher power or simply the power of stillness, you'll find something here that speaks to you. So if this message resonates, please share it with someone who may need it more than you know. And I invite you to tell me, do you pray? When do you feel it most? Your story might just become the light someone else was searching for. 1. Prayer doesn't change the situation, it changes you. Prayer is not a request for life to get easier. It's a return to the self, quiet, direct, and often uncomfortable. You don't pray to fix the world, you pray to fix the way you face it, and that's what changes everything. A man lost his job after a decade of showing up early, giving more than he was paid for, and believing that loyalty would be enough. He sat still, in the silence of his apartment, resumes unopened on the desk, shame creeping up through his spine. That night, for the first time in years, he whispered into the dark, not asking for success, just asking for clarity. Show me who I must become now. It wasn't a request. It was a moment of surrender. And in that surrender, he began to rebuild. Not his career, but his compass. He picked up a journal and wrote one question. If nothing outside of me changes, what can I still control? That's the Stoic approach to crisis. Life does not owe us predictability, but we owe ourselves resilience. The world may never answer your prayers the way you expect, but it will respond to who you become after them. Prayer doesn't shift reality. It shifts your posture toward reality. And posture, mental, emotional, spiritual, is everything. Stoicism teaches that we cannot control what happens, only how we interpret it and what we choose next. Marcus Aurelius didn't pray for peace. He ruled an empire through plagues and war. Yet in his journals, he returned again and again to one truth. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. In moments of chaos, your mindset is your shelter. That's what prayer builds. Not outcomes, but orientation. You go inward not to escape, but to recalibrate. Not to be passive, but to act from wisdom rather than panic. This man didn't get a call back, but he woke up with the direction. He canceled the noise, deleted the job alerts, and instead focused on building a small, consistent routine. He trained his body. He read 1 book per week. He reached out to 3 people each day, not to beg, but to serve. Months passed. Nothing big happened, but he changed. And because he changed, what he could carry changed too. Prayer becomes powerful when it's no longer about asking for less suffering, but about asking for more strength. That's the turning point. When your questions stop being why me and become what now, you've stepped into self-leadership. And that shift is not small. It's the ground where Stoicism is built. In a culture obsessed with results, this might sound foolish. But outcomes are illusions if they cost you peace. What Stoicism and spiritual discipline both teach is this. Inner clarity matters more than outer control, because control is temporary. But clarity, that's something you can build, hold, and return to every day. This isn't about pretending to feel okay. It's not denial, it's the opposite. It's radical acceptance paired with practical action. The man prayed not to be rescued, but to see himself clearly. Act with purpose, even in uncertainty, to become the kind of person who could walk through fire and keep walking. When life crumbles, most people collapse inward and stay there. Prayer, real prayer, is not collapse, it's conscious surrender. Not giving up, but letting go of the illusion that you need things to change before you can move. You don't. You can move from exactly where you are, If you're willing to take responsibility for the only thing that's always yours, your mind, you pray not to control the world, but to reclaim control of your response. That's what gives you power. That's what keeps you steady. That's what allows you to face the unknown with calm and quiet conviction. Because conviction doesn't come from guarantees, it comes from alignment. And alignment begins in stillness. It begins at the moment you ask not, how can I fix this, but who must I become through this? It begins when your prayers stop being wish lists and start becoming declarations of intention. When your words turn inward, when you ask not for easier roads but for stronger feet. This is not a comfortable path, but it's the only path that leads to true self-respect. Because comfort can be taken, reputation can fade, success can collapse. But who you become in adversity, no one can take that from you. Stoicism is not about suppressing emotion. It's about seeing emotion, letting it pass, and choosing your next move from a place of principle, not panic. Prayer supports that process. It gives you space to feel, but also a structure to return from feeling to focus. The world will continue to be unpredictable. People will continue to disappoint you. Opportunities will come and go. What remains is the foundation you've built inside. What remains is the stillness you've trained. What remains is the practice of pausing, breathing, and remembering. I am not powerless. I still have my response. The man who once whispered for clarity is now building a business, not out of luck, but out of intention. His prayer wasn't answered through a miracle. It was answered through transformation. Slowly, steadily, quietly, he became a person who no longer waited to be chosen. He chose himself. So the next time you kneel, close your eyes, or simply sit in silence and feel that urge to ask for help, don't just ask for the storm to pass. Ask to stand taller in the rain. Ask to see clearly. Ask to act wisely. Because prayer doesn't change the situation. It changes you. And when you change, everything you touch changes too. Some prayers need no words. There are moments when words simply don't come. Not because you don't care, but because nothing you say would be enough. In those moments, something inside you becomes still. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. And that stillness is prayer. You've probably been there before. Sitting in silence, eyes open or closed, hands trembling or steady, and something rises inside you, a quiet ache, a longing, a weight you can't explain. You want to speak, but no sentence holds the whole truth. So you just breathe and stay. And maybe without realizing it, you're already praying. Not every prayer needs to be spoken. Not every conversation with the divine needs a voice. In fact, the deepest ones often happen in silence. In the moments when your soul is too full for language. Sometimes you show up not to say something, but to be something. Present, open, real. And in a world that's constantly shouting, always rushing, constantly needing proof, your stillness becomes a sacred act. Not weakness, not passivity, but strength. Deep-rooted strength. The kind that doesn't flinch when nothing makes sense. The kind that remains when everyone else leaves the room. Stoicism doesn't ask you to beg the universe. It asks you to face reality as it is, with both eyes open and a calm heart. You don't need to pretend you're okay. You don't need to package your pain into pretty words. What matters is that you're there, with yourself, at the moment, without running, without judging. Stillness is not doing anything. It's choosing not to escape. Maybe you've been through grief, or loss, or disappointment so deep it made you forget how to speak. In those seasons, people might expect you to explain, to process, to wrap your suffering in words they can understand. But you know better. You know that pain doesn't always speak English. And healing doesn't always come with clarity, so you sit quietly, not because you're numb, but because you're awake, aware, present with your own ache. That presence is powerful. That presence is prayer. There's a kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, softly. And often it comes after you've stopped trying to perform strength and simply allow yourself to be real, honest, even broken. Stoic philosophy calls us back to what we can control. Not the past, not the opinions of others, but our response, our energy, our mindset, and yes, our stillness. When you stop needing to explain everything, you start feeling everything more fully. You become receptive, attentive, grounded. You don't need to beg for peace. Just stop feeding the noise. You don't need to beg for clarity. Just stop forcing your way forward. Breathe. Let the silence teach you what effort never could. You don't always need to speak to heal. You don't always need to speak to pray. Sometimes prayer is just sitting in the dark and lighting one candle. Sometimes it's walking barefoot through the woods without your phone. Sometimes it's lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, whispering, "I don't know what to do," and leaving the rest unsaid. Sometimes prayer is your ability to stay present with someone you love when they're hurting and words only make it worse. Sometimes it's not asking anything of the universe but simply being with it, without resistance, without conditions. When you stop talking, you start hearing the world again. You start hearing your own soul, and maybe for the first time in a long time, you feel heard too. Stillness is not empty. It's full of things you've spent years ignoring. The Stoics understood this, that peace is not something you wait for. It's something you create inside by removing what no longer serves. Noise, fear, expectations. When all of that falls away, what remains is something simple, pure, and powerful. You are in your most honest form. You are without the mask, without the pressure, without the script. And that version of you, that silent, steady, surrendered version, is enough. Enough to be heard. Enough to be loved. Enough to walk forward even when you don't know the next step. So the next time you feel overwhelmed and the words won't come, don't force them. Just sit. Just breathe. Just be still. That is enough. That is prayer. The kind that asks for nothing but gives you everything. 3. Don't ask for ease. Ask for strength. Let's be honest, you've probably wished at least once for life to just ease up, for the pressure to lift, for the silence in your chest to be replaced with peace. But here's the thing, no one wants to admit. The ease you're asking for won't make you stronger. And deep down, you don't just want relief, you want to rise. It's okay to feel tired. It's okay to want the pain to end. But don't build your life around escape. Build it around endurance. Don't ask for ease. Ask for strength. Ask for the kind of strength that doesn't just help you survive, but sharpens you in the middle of the storm. Because the world doesn't promise calm. The world offers challenges. And what you carry through it, your mindset, your habits, your philosophy, determines who you become. You may not be able to choose the weight, but you can choose how to lift it. You can choose what it turns you into. That's where the Stoic path begins. Not in wishing the world softer, but in training your soul harder. Not in fighting every difficulty, but in asking, what is this here to teach me? No one wakes up craving adversity, but life doesn't wait for your readiness. It tests you, not when you're prepared, but when you're exposed. And in those moments, you have two options: shrink into resentment or rise into responsibility. When you pray, don't just plead for the mountain to move. Ask for legs strong enough to climb it. Ask for a heart wide enough to hold the weight. Ask for a mind clear enough to stay grounded when everything shakes. That is Stoic strength. Not denial, but deliberate courage. Seneca once wrote, "Difficulty strengthens the mind as labor does the body." You wouldn't grow muscle without resistance. Why expect your spirit to grow any other way? There's a quiet kind of power that builds when you stop wishing the road was easier and start focusing on how to walk it better. That power doesn't show up in comfort. It shows up in repetition. In quiet mornings where you get back up. In decisions no one sees but that reshape everything inside you. And yes, it's hard. Some days you'll feel the weight of everything. The loneliness, the noise, the uncertainty. You'll want to scream, to quit, to beg for something lighter. That's normal. But remember, every moment you choose to carry on, you are transforming. Not someday. Now. You become the kind of person who doesn't fold under pressure, who doesn't need a perfect day to do the right thing, who doesn't crumble every time life doesn't cooperate. And that's real freedom. Not being free from problems, but being free from the need for things to always go your way. The Stoics didn't teach invincibility. They taught responsibility. You are responsible for your reactions, your focus, your energy. And when prayer becomes a space for recalibration, not rescue, it starts working in ways you didn't expect. You stop asking the world to give you what you want. You start asking yourself what kind of person you must become to hold what you've been given. That's when life starts shifting. Not because life got easier, but because you got stronger. And that strength isn't loud. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. You feel it in your spine. You carry it in your presence. You don't have to prove it. You just are it. So when you're tempted to pray for rest, go deeper. ask for resilience. When you want to escape, ask for endurance. When you feel like collapsing, ask for composure. You are allowed to feel it all, but you are not required to bow to it. Strength is not the absence of struggle. It's how you hold yourself within it. With breath, with grace, with grit. Strength is choosing to face life as it is and still move forward with intention. There's a reason why people who've been through the most often carry the most peace. They've stopped bargaining with reality. They've stopped asking life to be gentle. Instead, they've asked to become worthy of the life they've been given. And you can do the same. Don't wait for ease. Start practicing strength now, in the discomfort, in the fog, in the unknown. Let prayer become your anchor, not your exit. Let it remind you that the path is not about escaping difficulty, but about meeting it with clarity and character. Because you weren't born to float through life untouched. You were born to meet fire with focus, to face storms without losing your center, to walk through the darkness without becoming it. So if you're praying today, don't ask for things to soften. Ask for the will to stand taller. Ask for the discipline to keep going. Ask for the faith to keep breathing. Not because it's easy, but because you are becoming someone who doesn't need easy to keep moving. 4. Your weakest moment is your strongest prayer. Sometimes the most powerful prayer doesn't come from strength. It comes from collapse. Not the kind of collapse others see, the quiet one. The one where you close the door, fall to your knees, maybe not even physically, and whisper something you don't even understand. You're not sure if you're asking or begging or simply trying to breathe. That moment right there is your strongest prayer, because you're no longer pretending to be in control. There comes a point when life strips away every role, every identity, every plan, and all that's left is you, bare, broken, unsure. You try to hold it together. You smile when you need to. You say, "I'm fine," even when you're unraveling inside. But when it's quiet, when you finally admit you can't carry it alone, that's when something sacred begins. It's not a weakness. It's not defeat. It's surrender. But not the kind that gives up. It's the kind that lets go of the illusion of control, of the weight you were never meant to bear alone. The Stoics understood this more than we think. They never claimed to be unbreakable. In fact, they embraced difficulty as a forge, as a sacred fire. Epictetus, who lived as a slave, wrote, "Difficulties are things that show a person what they are." He didn't say hide from them. He said step into them, because it's there, in that raw, exposed, nothing left to prove space where your true character rises. Maybe that's what prayer is in its most honest form. Not reciting strength, but collapsing into truth. Have you ever felt that? That moment when nothing made sense, and all the advice felt empty, and all you could do was sit in the dark and say, "Please, just please." Maybe you weren't even sure who you were talking to, but something in you still spoke, still reached, still believed. That voice, shaky, fragile, stripped of ego, is not weak. It's real. And anything real has power. You don't need to be composed to be worthy of peace. You don't need to be strong to be heard. Sometimes the crack in your armor is the only place light can get in. And sometimes falling apart is the only way to find what still holds. When life breaks you open, you have a choice. You can numb it, run from it, distract yourself with anything louder than your pain, or you can stay. You can breathe. You can speak, not to perform, but to reconnect. That whisper from the floor, that cry you didn't even plan, that's prayer. Not because of the words, but because of what it costs you to say them. And that moment might not fix everything, but it shifts something inside. It softens what was rigid. It grounds what was spinning. It reminds you, even here, even now, you are still alive. And that's enough. You don't need clarity to pray. You don't need strength. You just need honesty. And honesty is born in weakness. The kind of weakness the world says to hide, but the soul knows how to hold. Do you want to know what real inner strength looks like? It's not walking tall when everything is going your way. It's not calm when the path is clear. Real strength is trembling in silence and still choosing not to quit. Still choosing to show up for yourself, even when no one else sees it. Still choosing to believe, faintly, desperately, that this moment isn't the end. Prayer, in your weakest moment, is not about convincing something outside you to rescue you. It's about remembering that the power to endure is already inside you, covered maybe, but not gone. Stoicism doesn't promise that hardship will pass quickly, but it does offer you a way through. And that way always begins with facing the truth of where you are. No masks, no excuses, just presence. And from presence comes perspective. You may not control what broke you, but you choose how you rise. And prayer at your lowest is the first movement toward rising again. Not with noise, not with answers, just with willingness. There's something unshakable in you, and sometimes it takes being completely shattered to find it. So if today you feel small, if you feel like everything is falling apart, if your prayers don't even feel like prayers anymore, don't panic, don't run, stay, breathe, let it come. Let the fear speak, let the grief rise, and when it does, meet it with honesty, not shame. Honesty is your strength, and that moment, that silent, trembling, almost broken moment, may just be the strongest prayer of your life. Because when you've lost everything else, you still reach inward. You haven't lost yourself, you're just beginning to come home. 5. Forgiveness through prayer sets you free. There's a weight that silence alone can't carry. The kind of weight you don't wear on your face, but you feel in your chest. Unforgiveness, bitterness, the wound that never closed because it was never released. You think about what they did, what they said, what they broke. Sometimes it hits you without warning. A memory, a phrase, a silence that screams. And every time it comes, you tighten, jaw clenched, heart closed, spirit tense. You tell yourself it's fine, you've moved on. But deep down, you haven't. Not really. Because some things aren't released through time. They're only released through prayer. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, especially when the person doesn't apologize. Especially when the pain changes you. Especially when everything in you says they don't deserve your peace. And maybe they don't. But you do. That's what forgiveness is, not a gift for them, but for you, a release, a turning inward, a declaration that you're done being tied to what hurt you. Don't forget, you don't pretend it didn't matter, but you stop bleeding over it. You stop letting it own space in your mind every day. You stop rehearsing the story that keeps you stuck in the same place. And that shift often starts in prayer, not a polished prayer, not a holy sounding one, just an honest one. I don't want to hate them anymore. I don't want this memory to rule me. I don't want to carry this pain another year. That's where it begins. Not with forgiveness as an idea, but with forgiveness as a choice, a practice, a quiet decision to let go of what's poisoning your peace. The Stoics spoke of freeing yourself from external chains, opinions, insults, betrayals. They didn't tell you to ignore pain. They told you not to become a prisoner of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In other words, don't become what broke you. Rise higher, live freer, and you can't live free while dragging a chain of resentment behind you. That's why you need a space to release it. A space that holds your emotions without judgment. A space where you don't have to be strong, wise, or spiritual. Just honest. Prayer gives you that space. You might say nothing out loud. You might just sit there, breathing through tears you didn't expect. That's okay. Forgiveness isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's slow, it's quiet, but it's real. You begin by naming what hurt, not to relive it, but to see it clearly. Then little by little, you hand it over. Not to erase it, but to stop gripping it like it still defines you. And maybe you never hear "I'm sorry." Maybe the person is gone, or unwilling, or incapable. That doesn't stop you from healing. Because healing doesn't depend on them. It begins with you. You get to decide when the pain no longer sets your emotional temperature. You get to decide when the story ends. Not in anger, but in a release. When you carry resentment, it colors how you see everything. Your trust, your peace, your capacity to love again. But when you forgive, truly forgive, something softens inside. You breathe deeper. You smile for no reason. You feel lighter, not because the past changed, but because you're no longer dragging it forward. And yes, it takes time. You may have to forgive the same person more than once. Not because they deserve it, but because peace is a daily choice. Some days, the bitterness creeps back. Some days, you feel justified in holding the anger. That's okay. But go back to prayer. Go back to that quiet place. Go back to the stillness that reminds you who you are. Not what they did, not what they broke, but what you've rebuilt. You're not forgiving to make peace with them. You're forgiving to make peace with yourself. That's the Stoic way. Not reacting, not clinging to pain, but choosing your response with clarity and strength. Prayer helps you return to that center, to breathe, to let go, to say, "This ends with me." You weren't meant to carry it forever. You were meant to heal. You were meant to walk lighter, and no one else can do that for you. So if today you're holding something heavy, an old betrayal, a wound that still aches, don't push it away. Sit with it. Speak to it. Not to keep it alive, but to finally release it. Whisper forgiveness, not because they asked, but because you're ready to stop bleeding from the same wound. And when you do, even quietly, even shakily, you'll feel something loosen, something settles, something shifted. You'll feel free. 6. Prayer helps you hear yourself clearly. The world is loud. It pulls you in every direction, feeding you voices that aren't yours, telling you what to chase, how to look, what success should feel like, what pain should sound like. And in that noise, something starts to fade, not all at once, quietly, slowly. It's your voice, the one that used to know what mattered, the one that used to feel clear. You don't lose yourself by accident. You lose yourself by listening to everyone else for too long. That's why you need prayer. Not as performance, but as a return to what's real, what's steady, what's yours. When everything outside is loud, prayer becomes a place to remember who you are without the noise. Not who you need to be for others, not who you've been trained to be, but who you are, when you're honest, when you're quiet, when nothing is performing anymore. There's a reason why the Stoics practiced daily reflection. Marcus Aurelius didn't write meditations for an audience. He wrote them for himself, to stay centered, to filter truth from illusion, to cut through distraction and ego. His journal was prayer, a space to listen inward, and you need that space now more than ever, because you're constantly being pulled out of yourself. By comparison, by pressure, by pain. And unless you pause, unless you intentionally turn down the volume of the world, you'll start living by voices that don't belong to you. Prayer brings you back to stillness, back to breath, back to the questions that matter. Who am I? What do I need right now? Not what do they expect? Where have I abandoned myself trying to keep up with everything else? These are the questions the soul asks when the mind grows quiet. You don't need the perfect words. You just need the courage to be silent long enough to hear what's underneath all the noise. You just need to listen. To yourself, not your fear. To your truth, not your timeline. That's what prayer gives you. Clarity. Not from outside in, but inside out. And yes, that clarity can feel uncomfortable, because when you finally hear your own voice again, you might not like what it's been trying to tell you. Maybe it's time to leave something you've stayed in too long. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for approval. Maybe it's time to admit that what looked like success feels empty. But that kind of discomfort isn't destruction. It's direction. When your life feels like it's spinning, the problem isn't always the pace. It's the silence you've been avoiding. The truths you haven't given space to surface, the feelings you've numbed in the name of strength. And prayer isn't just about finding peace. It's about facing what you've been running from. Stillness doesn't mean escape, it means honesty. You sit, you breathe, you let the dust settle, and then slowly, gently, your real thoughts rise to the surface. And maybe they're messy, maybe they're painful, but they're yours. Unfiltered, unmasked, unapologetically true. That truth is what you need, not comfort, not distraction. Clarity. Clarity is what keeps you steady. Clarity is what lets you act with intention, not impulse. It lets you move through difficulty without losing your compass. It reminds you what to hold and what to release, what to fight for and what to let go of. You're not lost because you're broken. You're lost because you've been disconnected from your own center. And every moment you give to stillness, real stillness, you reconnect. Maybe that's why people who pray regularly seem more grounded. Not because they don't have chaos, but because they know how to return to calm. Not because they have fewer problems, but because they have fewer illusions. Stoic wisdom doesn't promise fewer storms. It offers better anchors. And prayer is one of those anchors. A place to reset, to recalibrate, to realign, not with the expectations of others, but with the rhythm of your own life. Don't wait for life to force you into clarity. Don't wait for collapse. Build a habit of checking in, daily, honestly. Sit down, close your eyes, and ask, what am I ignoring right now? Then listen. You don't have to fix everything at that moment. Just name it, own it, Let it rise. That's prayer. Not begging, not bargaining. Just meet yourself with open hands. Some of the most important decisions you'll ever make won't come from spreadsheets or logic. They'll come from stillness. From that deep, quiet voice inside that finally gets to speak when everything else shuts up. And that voice, your voice, won't lead you wrong. You just have to give it space. So when the world feels loud and you feel scattered and your soul feels far away, don't reach for more noise. Reach for stillness. Go where you can hear yourself clearly again. That's what prayer is. Not a ritual, not a rescue, a return. 7. When no one understands you, pray in silence. You can explain yourself 100 times and still not feel heard. You can pour your heart out, use all the right words, even cry in front of people you trust, and still feel like no one truly gets it. Not your fear, not your confusion, not the weight you're carrying. And that kind of loneliness isn't just painful, it's suffocating. But there is a space where you don't need to explain, where you don't need to defend your feelings or justify your struggle. A space where your soul is enough, even without sound. That space is silence, and that silence is prayer. When no one understands you, pray in silence. Not because no one cares, but because the words were never meant for them in the first place. Not every ache is meant to be translated. Some truths live deeper than language. Some healing begins the moment you stop trying to be understood by everyone and start sitting with the one presence that always listens, your own. There is power in being unseen, not in being invisible, but in not needing others to validate what you're feeling. The Stoics understood this. They weren't concerned with proving their pain. They were concerned with mastering their response. If you are distressed by anything external, wrote Marcus Aurelius, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. You can't always change the situation. You can't always make people understand, but you can return to stillness. You can reclaim your inner ground, and that is often more powerful than being understood. There are days when silence is the only place you feel safe, the only place where you're not being told what to think, how to heal, or when to move on. And that space, free of advice, free of judgment, is where your soul begins to breathe again. You might sit alone in your room, or walk under gray skies with your hands in your pockets, or lie in bed staring at the ceiling long after midnight. And you say nothing, not out of numbness, but because silence is the only thing honest enough to hold what you feel. That's not a weakness, that's prayer. When your words have nowhere to go, and you feel like no one would understand them, even if you spoke them perfectly, that's when you learn to trust silence. And silence does not abandon you. In silence, you begin to hear not answers, but something deeper, awareness, grounding. The part of you that hasn't given up, the part that still shows up, the part that doesn't need applause, doesn't need recognition, doesn't even need clarity, just presence. Prayer in silence is not a last resort, it's a sacred return. It's stepping away from the noise of performance and back into the honesty of being. You don't need to shout to be heard by the universe. You don't need to articulate every detail to be known. Sometimes your tears are enough. Your breath is enough. Your simple willingness to sit in the silence without running from it is the prayer. The deepest connections are not verbal. The most profound healing often begins in stillness. You might think, but I don't know what to pray. That's okay. You don't need a script. You don't need eloquence. You need presence. You need willingness. You need to stop running from yourself long enough to remember you're still here. Sometimes the most sacred moment isn't when someone else finally sees your pain. It's when you stop hiding it from yourself. And in silence, that becomes possible. You begin to release the need to be understood. You begin to stop fighting for approval. You begin to trust your own experience. And when you do, something shifts. You don't need to be less emotional. You don't need to be more articulate. You just need to be real. In the quiet, as you are. And maybe, just maybe, you discover that what you needed was never someone to fix it, but a space to hold it. And you can give that space to yourself. The world may never understand the full weight of what you've carried. But you don't need the whole world to understand. You need stillness. You need grounding. You need the kind of silent prayer that doesn't change your situation, but changes the way you hold it. So the next time you feel alone, not physically, but soul deep, Don't fight it. Don't rush to explain yourself. Don't beg to be seen. Sit in the silence. Let it surround you. Let it soften you. Let it tell you what words never could. You are not broken for feeling this way. You are not wrong for needing space. You are not lost. You're just returning. And in that return, even without words, even without answers, you'll hear what you need most. You'll hear yourself. And that is enough. We began with a simple idea that prayer is not about changing the world around you. It's about transforming the world within you. In every section, you've seen how silence, resilience, stillness, forgiveness, and faith come together to shape a Stoic mindset. A mindset rooted not in control, but in clarity. Not in ease, but in strength. Prayer, as Stoicism teaches, is not weakness. It is alignment. It is where intention meets acceptance and where presence becomes power. When practiced consistently, it sharpens your mind, anchors your emotions, and restores your inner peace. Especially in moments of chaos or uncertainty, it reconnects you with what truly matters: your thoughts, your values, your soul. You don't need a temple. You don't need perfect words. All you need is the courage to sit still and listen. And then, respond with wisdom. I encourage you to make prayer a part of your daily Stoic routine. Not as a performance, but as a discipline. A few quiet moments each day to reset, to forgive, to realign. Over time, you'll notice the change. Not outside, but within. If this journey has touched you, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Have you ever prayed in silence? What has prayer helped you endure or overcome? Your story might be the very light someone else is searching for. Keep practicing, keep listening, and above all, keep trusting your prayers. They are heard, and they are shaping you more than you know.